Welcome, Cambridge students, literature scholars, and, well, anyone who just really loves poetry. Today, in this explainer, we're doing something pretty cool. We are setting out to decode the illusions of the 17th century world. We're unpacking Henry Vaughan's absolute masterpiece, Quickness. It's a poem that honestly feels just as urgent and electrifying today as it did hundreds of years ago. We're going to break down his philosophical ideas, his poetic toolkit, and literally everything you need to know to completely master this text for your exams.
I mean, just look at how he kicks us off. False life, a foil and no more, when wilt thou be gone? It's a completely provocative opening line. If you were to read this today, it honestly sounds exactly like a modern-day rejection of toxic hustle culture, doesn't it? But the wild thing is, Vaughan wrote this way back in the 1650s. He's coming right out of the gate rejecting the material world, basically calling our whole earthly existence a scam, a cheap setup.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, the world of Henry Vaughan. 2. False life versus true life. 3. The metaphysical toolkit. 4. Exam strategy. And finally, 5. Life lessons.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the world of Henry Vaughan.
Now, to really get this poem, we have to understand the historical chaos that actually shaped the poet. Vaughan's early life, pretty standard for a gentleman of his era. He was studying at Oxford in 1638 and then moved on to law studies in 1640. But then, 1645 hits, the English Civil War. Vaughan was a totally committed royalist, meaning he took the king's side. And our sources note that the absolute devastation of this war, especially the surrender of his own local town of Brecon to parliamentarians, completely disgusted him. He essentially went home to find his entire world shattered. And that trauma, that total collapse of his earthly reality, that is exactly what drove him away from secular pursuits and straight toward metaphysical poetry, culminating in his great 1650 collection, Silex Scintillans.
And that massive shift established his metaphysical foundation. Now, Vaughan was actually deeply influenced, even converted, by a fellow poet named George Herbert. But here's the catch. Unlike Herbert, who really celebrated church institutions, Vaughan was super fascinated by a mystical communion with nature instead. Our source materials really highlight how his deeply Christian worldview focuses heavily on the impermanence of earthly existence. And what's really fascinating here is how neutrally our sources frame this universal divine connection. Whether you refer to the Creator as God in Vaughan's Christian context, or Allah in broader theological summaries, Vaughan's exploration of this divine spark totally transcends its specific era. It reflects a universal human pursuit of eternal fulfillment.
Moving on to Section 2, False Life versus True Life.
Now we're entering the core argument of the whole poem, illusion versus reality. Vaughan sets up this incredibly stark contrast. False life is just an earthly illusion. He uses phrases like moon-like toil, meaning, it's inconstant, it's always changing. It's a dark contest and a moving mist. It's chaotic, blind, totally transient. True life, on the other hand, which represents divine reality, is the exact opposite. He calls it a fixed, discerning light. It is a knowing joy. We're talking about the ultimate serenity and enduring calm of a purely spiritual existence.
And this brings us to one of the most powerful images in the entire poem, a dark contest of waves and wind, a mere tempestuous debate. Okay, so Vaughan is literally weaponizing active, violent nautical imagery here. Think about it. So often, poets use the struggle against waves as this noble metaphor for spiritual progress. Not Vaughan. He completely hijacks that imagery to frame earthly effort as a complete waste of time. It's a dark contest with absolutely no prize waiting at the end.
So the absolutely crucial point here is how he handles the alternative. And hey, this is a fantastic tip for a Band 6 analytical observation. Vaughan doesn't waste his time painting pretty little pictures of heaven. While a lot of his contemporaries were writing reams and reams of poetry just describing the visual glory of God, Vaughan takes a different route. He bluntly states divine reality is simply a fixed light. Right? True life isn't described, it's declared. He presents it as an emotional fact rather than just a visual scene.
All right, Section 3, the metaphysical toolkit. Now, if you're writing an essay, this section right here is your primary evidence toolkit. Let's start with personification. Simply put, this is giving human qualities to abstract concepts, and Vaughan uses this specifically to emphasize the active, aggressive role of false life. Take the line, "Thou foul deception of all men." So false life isn't just some passive little mistake here. It is literally personified as a deceptive force that is deliberately leading people astray.
The analysis in our source points out that calling the world a foul deception, it lands like a common street insult. It's an active, malicious scam.
Next up in the toolkit is slant rhyme, or half rhyme. And guys, this is a massive piece of literary trivia. Vaughan is actually credited in our sources as being the very first poet working in the English language to use slant rhyme. Crazy, right? By pairing words with similar but not exactly identical sounds, he creates this jarring, unsettled auditory effect. It actively disrupts the underlying structure and meter of the poem, which actually makes his argument against the false life physically sound uncomfortable to our ears.
Finally, we need to talk about diction, his specific word choices. Words like wilt thou be gone and doth. Now we might read these today and think, oh wow, that sounds beautifully poetic and fancy, but our sources highlight that this archaic wording isn't meant to be decorative at all. Actually, scratch that, it's meant to be bluntly aggressive. That old-fashioned grammar makes his rejection of the material world sound immediate and raw, not just ceremonial.
Section 4. Exam Strategy and Symbolism.
If you want top marks, you absolutely need to confidently decode his symbolism. Let's walk through these. Take foil. Literally, it means a shiny surface or a dull background used to set off a jewel. But spiritually, it represents a cheap setup. It's an illusion hiding the actual truth. Then we have moonlike, which literally means changeable, and spiritually translates to the inconstant, frustrating earthly struggle. And then the title itself, Quickness. Literally, it refers to a fleeting spirit or liveliness. But spiritually, it symbolizes the pure, eternal vitality, that divine spark bestowed by the Creator.
So when you're formulating your thesis, these right here are your high-band essay themes. You can write about the shift from an abstract heaven to this feeling of physical alertness. You can discuss the absolute futility of being a worldly, toilsome mole. Or you can analyze the emotional transition in the poem's tone, how it moves from raw, critical anger at the beginning to absolute spiritual joy at the very end. You can also totally weave in his rich biblical allusions regarding the fall and salvation. Just remember, this is absolutely crucial. Always connect these themes back to Vaughan's historical context. Remind the examiner about that deep trauma from the Civil War to really hit those top marks.
And lastly, Section 5. Life Lessons from Quickness.
Let's pivot for a second from pure exam analysis to the profound, timeless takeaway of this poem. Vaughan ends with this incredible thought, "But life is, what none can express, a quickness which my God hath kissed." Our source notes just how wild this finale was for the 1650s. Vaughan literally swaps out the idea of an abstract, distant heaven up in the sky and replaces it with a tangible, felt human body. He shifts the ultimate prize from some distant paradise to a physical, energetic alertness, a quickness, right here and right now. Think about it, 1650. It's so easy to think of people from centuries ago as completely disconnected from our modern problems. But even back then, amidst a literal civil war, the surrender of his hometown, and total societal collapse, the human struggle against worldly distraction and the feeling of being trapped in a pointless moon-like toil, that was just as real for him as it is for anyone grinding through a difficult week today.
Which leaves us with this final question. If we are constantly surrounded by the moving mist of false life and empty ambition, in a world full of moon-like toil, what is your fixed light? What brings you that undeniable, knowing joy? I really hope this explainer helps you master Henry Vaughan for your exams, but honestly, more importantly, I hope it encourages you to find your own quickness. Keep learning and keep looking for the truth behind the illusion,